If you want me on Twitter, that's me there, @positiveteacher. If you want to use the hashtag, anything I say today that you want to carry on the debate, or you don't agree with something I've said, or you really agree, then you can just follow those hashtags, and that's my Twitter thing. Come along and let's have a chat. So that is my book, or mine and Mark's book on there. I'd love it if you could buy it. I'm going to show you the first review of the book. This was the TES. This was a reviewer for the TES. They sent us this review. So that's good. If nothing else, you can use it to prop up a table or something like that. So let's have a look at boys and how boys are doing. So we know that kind of internationally and across all key stages in almost all subjects, boys are underperforming in relation to girls. Whenever I mention boys in this talk, please prefix it in your own head with the phrase most boys, or some boys, or lots of boys, or more boys than girls. Obviously, I don't see boys as this kind of one homogenous mass. But anyway, so boys are underperforming. They're underperforming across all key stages in most subjects as well. I mean, the SATs results from last year, boys underperformed by 10 percentage points. In fact, in one assessment, the writing assessment, they underperformed by 13 percentage points. So it's a huge gap. And of course, at GCSE too. So because these things are happening to boys, lots of teachers all over the land and lots of educators, school leaders are asking this question: who's to blame for boys' academic underperformance? And in staff rooms and in the mainstream media and in boardrooms and meeting rooms, there are lots of kind of answers to this question bandied about. Things like testosterone, this idea that boys are biologically predisposed because of all the testosterone coursing through their veins to need to be active all the time. You get things, don't you, like these things that people say, like boys need things broken up into small chunks because they can't concentrate. Oh, boys fight all the time, but that's okay. It's that good old testosterone. We talk about their interests. Boys are just interested in computer games and sports. They're not interested in learning. And of course, parents as well. Parents reinforce these ideas about boys. Now, if these are valid answers to the question, who's to blame for boys' academic underperformance, if these are valid answers, which they're not, by the way, they're all complete bollocks. But even were they true, I'm not really interested in them because these aren't things I can control. Looking at boys, all they do is play computer games. I can't legally anyway, find myself in a kid's house in the evening and stand over him and control what time he finishes his Xbox playing so he can do his maths homework. When we're looking at parents or the influence of family, there's nothing I can do really about a boy who might want to do his English poetry homework, but he's getting teased by his older brothers who are saying he's gay for doing it, when presumably he should be out groping someone or something. So I can't control those things. And when we're thinking about testosterone and like this idea that boys' biology means they're not fit for schooling, of course, I can't control that. And certainly I can't control the way the mainstream media tends to like pick up on these like very negligible, arbitrary differences in boys and girls, because actually boys and girls are more similar than they are different. And turn them into these kind of sociological monsters. There's nothing I can do about that. So in answer to the question, who's to blame for boys' academic underperformance, I posit... Sorry, whoever that is, can you just put yourself on mute, please? Oh, I hope you resolve the issue. The thing I posit is us. I say that perhaps us, everybody in this virtual room that we're in now is somehow complicit in boys' academic underachievement. And this pattern of academic underachievement that's been going on for 50 years or so, and at the moment looks like it will carry on. Now that's not just something I've thrown out there. There is lots of academic research into the way that teachers stereotype or have an unconscious bias about boys and what they can achieve. And I'm going to just talk you through 3 key studies. If you've got the book, you'll know that there are lots more, but I think the 3 that I'm going to talk you through now are really interesting. So the first of these studies into teacher bias and the bias that teachers have towards boys was conducted in 2004 by Deborah Myhill and Susan Jones at Exeter University. And what Myhill and Jones did was they sent researchers into schools all over the country, primary schools, middle schools, secondary schools. And they asked a load of teachers, do you think boys should do as well as girls at school? Now, 80% of those teachers said, yeah, of course boys can do as well as girls at school, which is great. You know, if you got 80% in a test, you'd be happy. Although it does concern me that what that surely means is then that 20% of teachers actually have written boys off from the start. And I always think about, I don't know who these 20% are, but they must be idiots, because I know that if a researcher came into my school wearing a lab coat and a clipboard and asked me a question, do you think boys should do as well as girls at school? Even if I didn't think it, I wouldn't be so stupid as to tell them. But anyway, can someone put your mic on mute, please? Thank you. But let's focus on the 80%. So 80% of teachers, thank God, said actually boys are just as capable of girls at school. And that's great news, because what that means is, teachers aren't biased. But in actual fact, sorry, let me try and work out how to. Sorry, if you're here, could you please? How do I do it? I can mute everyone. Yeah, done it. Cool. Sorry. So these 80% of teachers, although they said they believe that boys are just as capable of girls at school, actually they were being observed in secret, okay, by the researchers. They were being observed in formal situations, I guess, like lessons, but also informally. So they were being observed on lunch duty or in the staff room. And what the researchers were doing with this 80% was they were looking at the kind of language that they were using about boys. And what the researchers were doing was literally doing a kind of tally chart, a checklist of negative versus positive comments. Because what they wanted to test was, okay, teachers say they believe that boys are just as capable of girls, but is that reflected in their language? And the hypothesis being that actually, if it wasn't reflected in the language, then that kind of natural discourse that we engage in every day is kind of a reflection of our true beliefs. Inevitably, the study did find that actually teachers do give voice to this kind of deficit model of male achievement. Boys are seen in terms of what they can and won't do, whereas for girls, it's the opposite. And on your screen now, I'm just going to put some of the things that the most common thing that teachers in the study said about boys. Now, I mean, I don't think we should hate ourselves if we've ever believed or still believe any of these things. In fact, some of these things might be true, but I think where the nuance comes is if they are true, they are only true now. They're only true because we, as members of society, have made them so. There's no baby boy at 2 days old or 2 seconds old actually saying one day I'm going to have all these feelings and I'm not going to talk about them. One day I'm going to dick around in my reading lessons. One day I'm going to make sure I have really bad handwriting. All right, these things are kind of culturally created. So the study concluded that actually teachers, yeah, they have this tendency to associate boys with underachievement, whilst the reverse is true for girls, which is equally as damaging, but that's the subject of another talk. Another study by Camille Terrier, 2016. This is an interesting one. Happened in France. What Camille and her team did was they got about, I think it was just over 5,000 teachers, and they split them in half, Group A and Group B. Now with Group A, they split them in half again and gave both of the two halves an essay. It was exactly the same essay. It was typed up. The only difference was that one half of Group A got this essay with a girl's name on the front, and the other with a boy's name on the front. And inevitably, I think it was 87% of the time. I'll have to double check the stats, but for a statistically significant amount of time, the boys' study was judged to be between half to 1.5 grades lower than the exact same essay with a girl's name on the front. With Group B, she split them in half as well and gave them the same essay twice, only this time there was no names on the front, it was blind, and there was no statistically significant difference in the grades awarded to the essay. So even just knowing the name of a kid and the indications that says about gender, or the information that gives us about gender, can have a significant kind of impact on the way that teachers grade students or grade student work. So there's another question to ask there about whether we should be grading our own students' work, or you know, should we take names off of assessments before we write them. Then of course you've got the thing with handwriting, so maybe assessments need to be typed up by somebody before we mark them. There's a whole big thing there. Tammy Campbell at UCL in 2015, in a study of over 5,000 primary school teachers, went as far as to say that the primary system is systematically biased against boys. Boys are almost always judged to be less good than girls, despite the fact that they score equivalently on tests. So there is this huge issue in teaching with bias. It tends to be that teachers have these kind of deficit models of achievement regarding boys, black students, SEN students, and pupil premium students, or students that they perceive to be of low socioeconomic status. But boys is a big thing here. So what does this mean for us? I mean, what it means for us actually is that, you know, we are not, despite what we think of ourselves, or what I think lots of teachers think they're saints. I think there's too many martyrs in teaching, and I think too many teachers hold themselves to these high standards of saintly behaviour. No doubt, because of course we want to kind of embody those very traits that we want to project onto the teachers, the students that we're teaching. But the fact is, actually, just like everybody else in this world, or certainly in this country, you know, we watch the same television programs as everybody else, the same news media, the same magazines, we read the same books, we listen to the same music. And what that means is that actually, just like everybody else, there's a little bit of our brain that is just a little bit of a prick. And so, you know, we do hold biases, even if we think we don't often. And I think that's empowering knowledge. I think it could sound kind of depressing. In fact, there is a theory, Tammy Campbell, who I mentioned earlier, has mentioned that actually teachers could be more prone to bias and stereotyping, because so much of our daily discourse in the job that we do is around groups and labels. We're talking about SEN kids, gifted and talented kids, pupil premium kids. You know, we label them into tutor groups, don't we? Set 1, set 2, set 3. Oak class, you know, everything we do in our job, like education is chaotic, learning is chaotic. And so we do label, because if we didn't label, we wouldn't be able to make sense of it all. But, you know, if we all accept that actually we might be biased, we can feel empowered by that, because then we can change us. You know, we can change us. So why is this bias that we might all have, certainly the evidence suggests we do, and why is it a bad thing? Well, we know from the Pygmalion effect that when we have high expectations of people, they will strive to meet those expectations or rise to them. I wouldn't believe any of that guff about growth mindset and like this idea that just because you have high expectations, students will do really well. Actually, people often forget that students or children are human beings like everybody else, and human beings often disappoint us. But at the very least, whilst it might not always come off, certainly the evidence suggests that when you do have high expectations of a person and you believe in them, they will certainly try to meet your expectations, even if it doesn't come off in the end. Now, the opposite of the Pygmalion effect is this thing called the Golem effect. And it's just a reverse process. If we have low expectations of a student or a group of students or a particular student, inevitably what tends to happen is that they fall face first into the gutter alongside those low expectations that we have of them. Now, luckily, stereotyping and bias is one of the most researched areas of psychology and sociology. Actually, lots of researchers are doing work specifically on teacher bias and how teachers can protect against bias. I'm going to talk to you now about a three-stage model of bias protection by a man who's done lots of research into this area. It's called Dr. Brian Earp. He was at Yale University where he did lots of this stuff. He's now at Oxford. So Earp draws heavily on years and years, decades of research into bias. And the easiest way to protect against bias, if we're going on the assumption that we might be biased against boys, or we might be biased against pupil premium kids, or we might be biased against SEN kids, is the very first thing we need to do is become aware of it. So, the moment you become aware of a bias, 80% of the battle's kind of done already because you check yourself. If you are aware that you tend to think that kids with scrawly handwriting aren't as clever, and you realise that, it's like, oh, then hopefully, next time you mark an essay that's written in this scrawly handwriting, you'll be thinking, okay, look, normally I tend to judge these kids down. Maybe I need to be aware of that. And so 80% of the battle's done. Now, the problem is, what we're talking about here is unconscious bias. So how do you become aware of a bias if it's unconscious? What we have to do, so much of what we do when we're dealing with problems in schools, like the boy problem, is we look outwards. We look for external speakers or gimmicky assemblies. But actually, I think what we really need to start doing is looking inwards. And I would say to any teacher that wants to improve things for boys needs to get together with other members of staff or on a whole school basis and consider their own attitudes towards boys and really face up to perhaps some grim realities about what they believe. Now, Earp advocates that teachers do this thing called a self-attitudes audit. And here's an extract from the book. So what you would do is you would get staff together, or you would get into a department, and you can change the things, for boys or different subjects. It might be that you're doing it for girls and physics. So you might, statement 3 might be, boys are naturally better at physics than girls. Or, but anyway, if teachers do this and answer it honestly, it can really, just trigger some quite uncomfortable realizations. And once you compare your results with other teachers and stuff, then you can really start to talk about what to do next. I think the audit is slightly stuffy. I prefer the idea in the book. I suggest that actually, rather than the audit, perhaps maybe discussion questions such as these, and actually have a real big discussion. Now, there will always be some kind of sanctimonious person there saying, "Of course, I have the same expectations of boys and girls. No, I don't think boys are naughtier than girls." You've got to, as a leader or anybody approaching such a task, you do have to kind of push aside that instinctive reaction and really think. But yeah, you know, just something like this is really powerful in kind of triggering. It's the best way to trigger any awareness of any biases you might have. So once you become aware of a bias, well, then what do you do? Well, luckily as teachers, we're in this kind of dream situation where we're able to seek contradictions to any bias that we might have. For example, if I believe that boys cannot write creatively, I'm an English teacher, so if I believe boys are rubbish at writing stories, actually all I need to do is walk around my school and find a kid that's written a wonderful story, or, you know, set a writing task, sorry, and then rather than just say, oh, boys can't write, actually look at it. I think a great example of this was a lady who told me recently after seeing me talk, was that for two years she's been running a revision session for year 11 boys after school, no girls allowed, just boys, about organisation. She believed that boys can't be organised, they can't get themselves organised. And so what she did was this session where the boys would turn up. She would give them all a ring binder, plastic wallets, highlighters, index cards. She would do a revision timetable with them. And then she taught them about colour coding, how to put things into plastic wallets, how to sort your ring binder by different topics and stuff like that. And results didn't improve after 2 years of these kind of things. So she actually, after seeing this talk, she went around her school, her year 11 classes, and looked for contradictions to this belief she had that boys are unorganised. Now, inevitably, what she found was that actually there are lots of boys that are organised. But what I really liked about it was that she actually found that there are lots of girls that are unorganised or disorganised. Okay, so what we've got here is, you know, these girls were being excluded from these revision sessions on the kind of sexist stereotype that girls have got it all together, you know. And I know that this year the session, well, I don't know if it's happening now because of the pandemic, but the plan this year was to actually, you know, have both sexes or genders attend if they wanted to, because they believe they have problems with organisation. And that's all you really need to do. You know, seeking contradictions. One, I used to believe that boys had naturally messy handwriting, and after I read the research, I went around my school and I found boys with lovely handwriting. And that's all I had to do, was just look at it, find this one kid with the beautiful handwriting and just look at it. I didn't have to do a stupid reflection. I didn't have to report on it to my boss. I didn't have to go and type it up or input it into some bloody awful spreadsheet. All you got to do is become aware of your bias and then find out that contradiction. And again, honestly, 5 or 6 years after I saw this beautiful handwriting, I've done a lot of research for the next book into handwriting bias, but when I mark essays now, I always remember that first kid I saw, that boy who had this beautiful handwriting. I remember exactly what it looks like. And so now my temptation is to think, it's messy handwriting. It's going to be a boy. It's going to be rubbish. That isn't a problem for me now. And finally, what we need to do is have high expectations. We need to stop making things relevant for boys. Right? We need to stop lessons about football. We need to stop poetry lessons where we look at rap music lyrics. We need to stop bringing pizzas into maths because boys like pizza and they can, you know, learn fractions using a pizza. We need to stop all that. We need to, we have to really give boys what they're entitled to, which is a beautiful kind of depth and richness of curriculum that reflects, you know, the best of what has been thought, said, painted, discovered, argued, debated, made, created. And, you know, I can talk about high expectations for hours. There is a chapter in the book dedicated to it. So that's our stuff about bias and kind of the expectations that teachers have of kids. What I'd like to talk about now is kind of why do some boys, all right, have an anti-school, actually really that should say anti-learning Why do some boys have an anti-learning attitude? Because I know there are lots of boys that love school because they get to play football and see their mates, but don't necessarily like learning. So why do some boys have an anti-learning attitude? The answer, of course, is peer pressure. And for lots of boys in our schools, the rules that are up on your screen now, they're the rules that boys are following. All right. So let's talk about why this is. Now, we know that people who view themselves or present themselves as gender atypical are far more likely to be bullied or teased by their peers. Right? Even in 2020, a girl that cuts her hair short and wears trousers and plays football with the boys at lunchtime, she's more likely to be bullied than a girl that doesn't. Equally, a boy that wears makeup and a skirt to school, or a boy that doesn't like football but likes, I don't know, netball, if we're going to say that's a girly sport, he's more likely to be bullied than boys who like football and don't wear makeup to school. And actually, despite boys, or men constantly going on, being the stronger sex, that's not true at all. We all know that. Actually, boys are much more likely to feel pressure to conform to kind of gender expectations of what it is to be a boy than girls are. Girls are a little more comfortable with breaking out of what it means to be a girl, whereas boys are almost like pack animals at times. In the sense, I don't mean that they're wild and they're savage. I mean that in the sense that boys like to be like other boys. So the problem with all this is that all the research shows that actually all those things that lead to good results, academic results, being organised, cooperative, scholarly, these are things that are seen as feminine, whereas all the opposite things are what it means to be a boy. So boys, will, even if they are organised, they will pretend that they're not. They will argue with the teacher. They won't make any effort in class because that is what being a boy is all about. And even in 2020, the worst thing for many boys that they could be seen as is feminine. So there's this kind of vicious circle. I want to look now at what we can do about this. How can we combat this thing with peer pressure that leads to these kind of low academic input from the boys that then leads on to poor academic output later on. So I think one of the first things we do is we do need to tackle this thing of non-tender masculinity. Non-tender masculinity is what the rest of the world calls toxic masculinity. Right, so toxic masculinity is all about aggression, assertiveness, power, heterosexuality, being a man. In the book, we rejected the term toxic masculinity because we believed that we didn't like the idea that we thought that the word toxic suggested that masculinity was some kind of poisonous contagion, almost inevitable, and we didn't like that. We liked non-tender because it pointed to a more desirable alternative, which is tender masculinity. Now, tender masculinity is masculinity that's all about, boys that are imbued with a sense of tender masculinity are boys that see the value of hard work. They don't feel entitled to anything. They work hard for everything that's coming their way. They lift others up. They know that it's okay to talk about how you're feeling. They can be weak when they need to be. But actually, there's still a lot of non-tender masculinity in schools. I still, even now, in 2020, and all the work I've done in this, I still teach boys who put their hand up and answer a question, and other boys start sniggering or call them a boffin or a nerd. And actually, I think I'll admit it, at times I don't tackle it because it's just like, oh, well, but actually I'm doing the boys a disservice here. Do you know what I mean? So I do think we need to really stamp down on all those kind of anything that could be seen as negative masculine behaviours, because I think they're all wound up. They're all quite kind of contrapuntal. They're kind of at binary opposition to good outcomes in school. We do need to recognise boys' achievements in a subtle way. Unfortunately, a lot of the research shows that lots of boys don't even try, because by trying, they might get public recognition for an achievement. And yes, boys might want to do well, and they might want to work hard, but still, you know, the culture of the playground rules supreme, and they're not going to try hard because it might be that they get called up in assembly to collect a certificate. And I don't know if I mean, I've been in countless, particularly when I've worked in kind of deprived schools of low socio, you know, majority pupil premium schools and stuff. Often, you know, when boys have done well and then their name is announced in assembly, they're literally terrified of going up. They refuse to go up and get that certificate. I know some schools have done this really well. I've been in schools where the boys are really happy to get an academic achievement certificate. But actually what your best bet is to do is you've got to get there slowly. Boys do appreciate one-to-one chat. So, you know, it doesn't have to be this big, well done, Jack, yeah, a ticker tape and all the rest of it. It can be, Jack, can you just wait behind after class and just speak to Jack quietly then. We know that phone calls home are universally effective as well in raising boys' achievement and motivating boys. So that's another way we can do it. 97% of students in one study, 97% of students involved in anti-bullying programs and environmental initiatives at school are female. Boys just don't do that sort of thing. And I think that's dreadful. I think we do need to start incentivizing boys to get involved in these things. And I know that's kind of counterintuitive, because we want boys to do anti-bullying programs or do an environmental drive out of the kindness of their own hearts. Right now, they might have their kindness out in their hearts, but again, that rule of the playground and that peer pressure. The moment you do something like that, you're being complicit in school, and lots of boys don't want to be complicit in the art of schooling. So I do think we need to give boys vouchers or a bit of pizza at the end of the year if they get involved in these things, and the girls too, of course. Now, but I think you could phase it out so that eventually, when you've got your new year sevens coming in, they see that boys, you know, 5 years older than them, do these things, and for those year sevens, it's just normalised. But I think if you're going to get it off the ground initially, I do think there needs to be a programme of incentivisation. I think we need to mind our language. I think we need to mind boys' language. Okay, of course. So jokes about paedophilia, rape, sexual innuendos and sniggering about masturbation, and calling somebody gay in the pejorative sense. We need to get rid of all that. But also, I think teachers need to mind their language. You know, I don't hear the phrase girl heavy so often, but a lot of the time I do hear the phrase boy heavy. And I think that boy heavy or boy problem, certainly boy heavy, it sounds kind of like onerous, like boys are a burden. Other things, man up. I still hear teachers, TAs say that to boys all the time. I think they think it's like banter, and it might be banter, but ultimately it's not good. You know, boys are off sick, and I see teachers gently mocking them for having man flu. Actually, sometimes boys just get ill, all right? And it hurts and we cry. Right, it's not man flu, it's the flu. Actually, it's not the flu. When we say we got the flu, it ain't influenza, is it? It's normally just a cold. Bromance, that's another one I hear a lot. Bromance, like two boys get on, and it's called a bromance. My co-author and I, we get that a lot. People saying to us, oh, I love your little bromance. And it pisses me off, because we've got to stop fetishizing loving male relationships. I love my co-author Mark, he's my best friend, and I love him. Doesn't mean I want to have sex with him. Boys are allowed to have loving relationships. It's not a romance. And I think the moment we start, perhaps I'd sound like I'm being really woke here, but I think the moment we change our language, even things that aren't necessarily immediately related to academic achievement, there's just a cultural shift generally, and it kind of empowers us to then tackle the next step, which might be more about academic achievement. And we do need to, I think, provide opportunities for boys to discuss their feelings. boys don't care about the gender of their teacher, right? And actually, the gender of a teacher has no impact on boys' attainment. Okay, so boys will thrive or not thrive whether they've got a male or a female teacher. However, lots of research shows that boys would prefer a male teacher on the pastoral team to talk about personal issues, particularly things relating to sex and the body. And I don't know if that happens enough in schools. Often the schools that I've been in or I've gone to, the office staff, the people whose job it is to liaise with home and to provide like this kind shoulder. It's almost like these quite motherly figures, which is lovely and is fine. But certainly I wouldn't expect a girl who's having maybe some body consciousness issues, or I wouldn't feel comfortable with being the only person for her to talk to. And, if a boy, is worried about his penis size, that's something that surprisingly, especially given the amount of pornography some boys watch, it's something they're quite concerned about. And it presents some genuine anxiety. And actually going to a female teacher and telling her that you're worried about the size of your penis or some horrible discharge from somewhere can be quite embarrassing. But it's not just about all that. I think we also need to recognise that just as women and girls have this unique perspective on what it's like to be subjected to abuse, harassment, objectification on the daily, boys have a unique perspective on what it's like to be a man or to be male or to be gendered male. And I wonder that in our subjects, do we recognise that? Do we accept that, just as our female students might be better placed to talk about how Jane Eyre feels when Rochester mistreats her in that kind of horrible misogynist way, or if you're studying the feminist movement in the 70s in history, I do think that female students can provide a uniquely female, probably more valid experience on that. Well, are there things that boys, do we ever recognise boys and their unique perspective on the world? And I think particularly in the humanities subjects as well, often we miss opportunities, I think. So as an English teacher and a feminist, I spend a lot of my time discussing the way that female characters are marginalised, but actually, do I spend enough time talking about the fact that every single male protagonist in every book I teach tends to either be a murderer, a rapist, or some horrible villain? Do I ever ask boys, what do you think about that? Like that, just like I'd say to the girls, what do you like? Don't you think it's unfair that Curly's wife is labelled a whore just because she wears red lipstick? And I think there are other subjects you can do that. PE, PE. I used to teach a bit of PE GCSE, and there was a unit on doping and stuff like that. And all the images in the textbook were always of male dopers. And I think back now, maybe I should have asked the question: why are there no images of female dopers there? Or is it boys? Do you think there's extra pressure on boys to cheat in sport? And again, that might have just been a way. I mean, I didn't really have a problem with PE anyway, but that might have been a way to get boys involved that maybe otherwise wouldn't. And I think that all our subjects enable us to do that. I think we just need to think a little bit more carefully about that. Right, I am going to stop sharing my screen now because I think I've run out of time. Feel free, I don't know how it works, like if you want to ask me any questions in the chat or whatever, or if you just need to go, that is totally fine. Thanks to you all for listening to me, putting up with me. I hope you all have a great weekend. It's honestly lovely to see you. I'm going to unmute. If you want to say hello, you can. You don't have to. Thanks, Matt. Oh, that's very sweet. Oh, aren't people nice?
Hi, Matt. I'm going to perk up.
Who's that?
It's Alex. It's Alex. I haven't got my
Oh, hi, Alex.
Hi. I'm here now.
How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm interested. I work with autistic pupils mainly. Which
Yeah, me too. I'm an assistant head
oh
of
dear.
school. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I worry a lot about mental health with lads, particularly with autism. I was just wondering whether you had any sort of insight about how to make sort of school more bearable for them being autistic and being male. Have you got any ideas?
Yeah. I mean, I've only been head teacher of an autistic school since September. I'm still very much new to learning about it. In terms of masculinity, I'm very aware that I don't think there's autism specific stuff. I think there's male stuff and stuff about boys and the problems they have with their emotions. But I am very aware that for the autistic boys I teach, not for all of them, of course, but for many of them, it can be harder for them to actually grasp kind of social norms and stuff. And I know for many of them, if they're seeing men just always being sexist, I think that autistic kids, certainly some of the autistic boys that I teach, are probably more vulnerable than neurotypical boys to perhaps indulging in those kind of toxic masculine behaviours, because they're just a little less able. So I think anything I'd say to all schools is, look, you've got to be talking about gender and language and sexism in schools, and you do have to lay the blame at men, I think, often. And I think that, particularly at my school, I need to be doing it probably more often and delivered in such a way that the autistic kids that I teach can access it. Is that?
Yeah, no, I think that helps. I think you're right about the sensitivity and the kind of I find that, if something happens in school, there's a lot of rumination about it, and it becomes sort of almost a bit of an obsession, and that's a really difficult thing to sort of move past, isn't it?
Yeah, I think lots of us find talking about gender, particularly talking about sexism, and quite difficult. Like, so what we're doing at my school, for example, we're outlining now exactly what we consider sexist. So, in lots of schools, you have a racism policy, you have a homophobia policy, but never do I see in schools a sexism policy. Okay, so I've literally done this document, and I will share it on Twitter once it's all up and running. But the case will be from September. If you wolf whistle at a girl in school, that is sexual harassment. Now, too often things like this aren't dealt with because teachers don't know. Like, is a wolf whistle sexual harassment or not? Well, in my school now it is, and teachers have to sanction it, and kids have to not do it because they know. I'm doing that because it's an autistic school, and I think it really benefits my kids knowing exactly what they're.
The rules.
We're doing assemblies. We're going to do in assemblies talking to them about asking for consent. So some of our older pupils that are getting into relationships and want to hold hands, that's fine. But also you need to ask before you hold your girlfriend's hand or your boyfriend's hand. But I'm doing that as an autistic school. But honestly, I think all schools need to be doing this, right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely, because it's kind of more problematic now, isn't it? They're exposed to things like porn much more than they were before, and they get the wrong messages, don't they? And get into trouble, especially the ones with autism. Unfortunately,
it's a good question. And, if you want to get in touch on Twitter or something, I'd love to continue talking about it. Cool. Okay. Anyone else got any questions?
I have a question today, Matt.
Hello, mate. I like your shirt.
Hi, how are you? Thank you. So obviously a lot of the work I do is to do with LGBT plus equality. And I'm really, really interested in not just how we support our LGBT students, but how we reposition, reframe masculine thinking about homosexuality and reposition our kind of straight boys thinking about LGBT students.
Yeah.
Do you have any strategies or ideas on that?
Do you know what was so powerful for me last year? And this is a weird one, James. Did you deliver some training yesterday, James?
This morning.
This morning, yeah. A friend of mine was in it, said it was excellent.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
it's a weird one here because we're kind of playing on stereotypes that I want to crush. But in my last school, I got in there. I've got a skinhead. I'm a bit rough around the edges. I don't really talk like a normal teacher. But for me, the most powerful thing I did was, and it's only a really little thing, this, James, but I abandoned homonormative pronouns. So often as an English teacher, a lot of what I do is when I'm explaining something, I tell a funny story or an anecdote. So it might be like I'm saying to kids that, let's look at this poem, this sonnet, right? 6 months ago or a year ago, I would have said, why would a man write his girlfriend a sonnet? Right? And literally all I did one day was like, why would a man write his boyfriend a sonnet? Right? Or I'd tell stories about, that reminds me, kids, once I was in this nightclub and I saw this good looking guy and I went up to him and literally all I did was, I wasn't doing it all the time. Sometimes I'd be heteronormative.
Yeah, of course.
I remember the very first time I did it and I didn't even flinch. And you could see all the boys on the football team like looking at each other like, is he?
Yeah.
And they found out I had a girlfriend and whatever, but I still do it. And I noticed such a change in the way they would say stuff like, if a kid was saying, what if he doesn't love her? And the boy would shout out, he doesn't have to love her, he can love him. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like just that real subtle change. And I think there's so much of what we do is about explanation, isn't it? And maybe it's a bit easier for me as an English teacher. But yeah, I like, and writing stories and just have a gay couple or whatever. And that for me, I know it's only a tiny thing, but I was shocked at the impact that had.
I completely agree. I think we call it usualizing and actualizing in the kind of idea of making something normal by embedding it daily. I think what helps is that you as a role model being masculine, that really works well.
Yeah, I know, and that's the kind of paradox, isn't it? I think, sorry to interrupt, but I think PE teachers, for example, if you get these male PE teachers, the boys adore them. They're gods for lots of these boys. And, if you can get male PE teachers just, even if they're like having a chat with each other about something they did at the weekend, and they know that boys are kind of there listening, like hanging on their every word, and just, oh yeah, my mate, him and his boyfriend came over, and even if it didn't, but like I mentioned earlier, like me talking about, I saw a really good looking guy in a club. Like I am actually heterosexual, but I don't. Sure. And it works, it's fine.
It's powerful.
I was kind of like white lies because there was a greater good. So yeah.
That's really useful, thank you. And I've bought The Age of Innocence on your recommendation recently as well, so I will read it and tell you what.
Oh, brilliant! Yes, James. Yeah. Let's talk some more.
See you later.
Let's talk some more.
Take care. Nice to see you.
Cool. Thanks. I'm going to have to go at 1:30. It's my
birthday,
but I'm here if anyone wants to chat still.
I've got a quick question. It's not really a quick question. It's kind of like a massive. Julia, hello.
Yeah, hey Julia, I can see you.
You can see me. That's all right. I don't know why the waving helped. I feel like it would have done. It's kind of I work in a PRU, so we mostly get boys. Mostly. I'm in the secondary unit, so I work a lot with Key Stage 3, 4. I work a lot with boys, and trying to tackle that culture of non-tender masculinity is like an ongoing process for a whole vast variety of reasons. And my classic example was recently one of my lads who was having a complete meltdown one day and wanted to punch this other kid in the face, and he said, send him out here and we'll sort it out man to man. I was like, and I sort of tried to challenge this, and his response was, shut up, what would you know about it, you're a woman. Went off, came back, said, sorry miss, that was really disrespectful and I should listen to you. And I was like, thank you very much. But the ongoing process of trying to manage those kind of and often it's experience and the role models that they have had and different things. Any top tips for dealing with that kind of thing? Like, how can I fix that in 2 seconds?
The most common question that Mark and I get asked after these things is female teachers that say, like, we're really on board with your message and everything you espouse in the book and in your talks, but ultimately you're a white heterosexual male with a skinhead. They're going to listen to you more. I'm a female, and that puts me at a disadvantage.
Yeah,
because boys will write it off and say, oh, but you're just a woman, or oh, stop being such a feminist. You know, and it's unfortunately, we don't really have any answers yet. However, we are for the second book. It's something we're researching now.
Okay.
A kind of what what can female teachers do? I think my answer would be just unashamedly, just fucking keep going.
Bashing it.
Just
keep
going.
I mean, I'll give them their due. Most of the lads, they do take things on board. It's usually the initial like, oh, shut up, yeah, but they respond generally to like just being consistent with them, and so from that point of view, they do take notice. Yeah. But there's just this initial like, and I think some staff might find that more challenging, and they're like, well, there's no point me saying anything because they're not going to listen to me. I mean, I'm just like, tough, you're going to listen anyway. But
I'll talk to you on Twitter about this. I want to think about
all
it
right more. Have a think. It's a bit of an unfair question, really, because it's like a massive issue.
I've been asked it a few times. Yeah. I still can't. I mean, keep going, nag, moan, whatever they call it. Keep going, you know. You do have to get staff buy-in, don't you? That helps. It can't just be one of you. You need like leadership to maybe make staff aware of the value of this sort of thing, so that everybody can get behind it. Sorry, I can't give you a straight answer now, but
that's all right.
Pile it over.
Oh, I was being a bit mean because I thought this is a really horrible question. But
I like horrible questions. They're questions that need to be answered, and it'd be amazing if I could find it. So right, thanks. Anyone else want to chat? Got 5 minutes? No, you all right? Okay, I'm gonna end the meeting. But thanks everyone. Comments are really lovely. Like I said, at Positive Teacher, I'll put it in the chat. Positive Teacher, spelt like that. Thanks, Paul. If you how do I do this? Send. Yeah, there's my Twitter handle if you want to stay in touch. Cool. Thanks everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. Get drunk, but not in a pub. All right. See you later.
Thanks.